Hi, it's Dwyer. It's Sunday, November 9th, 2025. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. Also, keepingitfree.blogspot.com, a free site. Nothing I say in this video should be construed to be investment advice. If I mention a stock or an ETF, your operating assumption should be that I'm either interested in owning that stock or ETF or that I already do. Right? Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Trust no one, including me. Go with your own due diligence and data. Now, folks, I just woke up. I'm in an ornery mood right now. If I have one message to share here, it's to get the macro. If you do, the rest might follow. Right? Let me point out, too, that your own personal macro, your view of the world, your view of what's happening, is going to change over time. Right? Some of the things I knew to be true when I was 20, now decades later, I understand are not true. Right? Other truths have persisted. You have to figure out, quite frankly, where markets are headed. Right? That's what matters, by the way. Markets. You have to figure out where markets are headed. Right? Not just public markets, but private markets. You need to figure out what's creating abundance and what's creating scarcity. And every day, you need to work on fine-tuning that macro view. You'll find out that in the world you have some bad actors, you have some good actors, but you mostly have confused actors. Right now, without going into specifics, because I run a paid crypto blog that has paid subscribers that I have a duty to, I can't believe the crypto market right now. You have some stunning values. My crypto newsletter is dwyer70905.substack.com. It has a free tier that people can participate in. Well, let's talk about some ideas today. I'm going to disagree with the orthodoxy. Right? Just understand you've had some mind-blowingly bad ideas over the last few decades, made by some very experienced and influential people. Right? One of them was the decision by a former vice president who became president of the United States, who won a presidential election by a wide margin in 1972. It's Richard Nixon's decision to take us off the gold standard, right? To de-link our money supply from the gold supply. That's a monumental bad mistake, right? One of the lessons in life I've learned is that the idea of a market is a stunningly good idea. It's one of the most advanced pieces of wisdom that we have. And over time, you have to let markets clear. Right? So, what I want you to do is to just think about your neighborhood. Think about your block. Think about your local housing market. Right, folks? Just understand that if price levels change, the current 3-bedroom house is still going to be a 3-bedroom house. In other words, if the next group, if the current market's clear, if they've been propped up, or if they appreciated in value because you had a one-time demographic baby boom in the past that led to greater scarcity, right? You had a population spike that got reflected in house prices jumping. Right now, of course, demographics are vastly different than that. You understand that. Then I just want you to consider the idea of having the housing market clear. Right? A housing market where people are paying, in some places up to 15 times their annual earnings leads to a hangover where you get young people in major cities like New York City and Chicago. Let's not forget Chicago. Picking these democratic socialist leaders. You show me a democratic socialist and I'll show you a socialist. Right? You have young people losing hope because they feel that they will never be able to participate in what we used to call the American dream. Right, folks? There are consequences for price distorted housing markets. If you let markets clear, then young people will have an opportunity to enjoy the 3-bedroom houses or more in your neighborhood that earlier generations were able to enjoy. Right, folks? The fallout might include people having pride in home ownership, believing in markets, not relying on politicians, understanding that markets are going to clear. We might even get back to the healthier situation that we had in the housing market as reflected in the Shiller Real Estate Index. Please look that up. Shiller, Shiller. I want people to look at the annual growth in the price of a house during the era before Nixon took us off the gold standard. Folks, homes were affordable. They appreciated in value moderately. Right? It's only because we went off the gold standard at a time when we were having a population spike. Right? Baby boomers eventually became old enough to buy homes, and there were more of them. That led to the volatility in housing that we've had. Right? And of course, the loosening of credit. So then, of course, by the 2006, 2007 era, you had a situation that created The Big Short, on which the movie made later was based. Right? I need for folks to just understand that the idea of trying to manipulate markets has a fallout that simply is detrimental to, you name it, wealth equality, the hopes and dreams of young Americans, our selection of political representatives. Right? Understand, I went to school I'm more of a macro guy, right? I was an econ major in college. I'm more of a macro guy. My college roommate happened to be an electrical engineer, right? Very mathematical, lefty, right? Very mathematical. And, you know, housing used to be just another asset class, right? I didn't view housing as some risk-on asset. And my college roommate, great friend, he and I are still great friends, communicate several times a week. He seemed to believe, and this is the madness that takes over when you de-link the monetary supply from gold. He seemed to believe that housing was the only way to make passive income. Right? He viewed housing as, the equivalent of investing in a startup. Right? He would continually talk about generational wealth. And I saw housing as some leveraged market that was unsustainable. Right now, we went to a school in the Bay Area, and just understand, the as you could imagine, the price of real estate in places like San Francisco. This was before the commercial real estate market became gutted to where even lenders are afraid to mark their holdings to market. Right? But you reached a point where, the median house price throughout much of, we'll call it the West Bay, right? Not the East Bay, not Oakland and Fremont, but the West Bay, San Francisco, Palo Alto, San Mateo, Cupertino, San Jose. The median price of a house started to exceed $1 million. Now, I've mentioned this in other videos. Talk to your neighbors, know who they are. I used to go to the post office a lot. Right, and I'd be standing in line, and I'd be talking to people, and there'd be teachers there. There'd be plumbers there. In other words, this area, how do you put it? It's a typical middle class area. And you'd look at someone and you'd think, wow, a teacher, let's say they're making $100,000 a year, right? There was an era where the price of a home was 4 to 5 times your annual income. You look at people and you start to realize, a single person would have to work for 10 to 12 years just to afford the local home. Folks, there's a word for that. Unsustainable. That's not a market we should be protecting. That's not a market we should have the future generations deal with. Those aren't market conditions we want. There's too much money right now, the reality. There's too much money right now invested in the housing market. Right? If home prices adjust to historical means, millions of dollars are going to become available for investment because it's going to leave the current housing market. Now, against that backdrop of decades of history, again, I encourage people to look at the Schiller Real Estate Index through the years. Go back 50 years prior to Nixon taking us off the gold standard. Right? And you're going to realize that, it's only recently that you've had situations like the situations in The Big Short. Right? Got news for you. If you go right now on Zillow and look up San Francisco real estate. You know, there was a place I was looking at in San Francisco in about 2015, and it was way too expensive. I couldn't believe it, right? Let's say less than 1,000 square feet. You know, it was going for, well north of $1 million. Folks, the price today on Zillow, 10 years later, is much less than the price that place sold for in 2015. In other words, the housing bubble was so pronounced that the person who bought the house in 2015 has no appreciation on the property. None. Right? They've been enriching the bank. Figure out who gets enriched the first few years of a mortgage. Most of your payment is going to interest expenses. The bank made a mint. The homeowner made nothing, paying a hefty mortgage that I'm guessing would prevent the homeowner from investing in some of the great investments of our time. Bitcoin, right? Gold. So, now I'm hearing that the Trump administration, which is a train wreck for libertarians, right, folks? This is the train wreck. This is the president who knows better than the market and wants to place tariffs on American citizens, right? As I've pointed out many times, the person paying the tariff is the American buying the imported product. Well, now the Trump administration has the grand idea not of letting the housing market clear. What's wrong with that? Right? Homeowners took the risk. The person in 2015 who bought the magnificent condo I was thinking about, they took the risk in buying the real estate at a historically elevated level, at a time when people were going to start leaving the state of California, at a time when the commercial real estate around the condo was overpriced. We know that now looking back, right? The people who should take the risk are the market participants, not the U.S. taxpayer. Our politicians shouldn't be propping up markets. So now the Trump administration, according to reports, and it's shocking, I've been up less than half an hour as I have to deal with this drama, is proposing 50-year mortgages. Folks, is that what you want? You have some pundits who've made money in real estate, who are involved in real estate. Grant Cardone. Please Google his current thoughts after a life of dealing in the real estate market, who believe that buying a home today at these prices is dead money. That's what 30-year mortgage is. Now you're going to make it a 50-year mortgage? Don't you ever want this young generation to be able to afford a house? Right, folks, I got news for you. If the current homeowner takes a 20% haircut, as I mentioned before, when they sell the house, the next buyer is going to get the same house. Right? That 3-bedroom, that 4-bedroom is still going to be a 3 or 4-bedroom. What's wrong with the next generation getting bargains? Right, folks? If home buyers were acting in ways that were economically unjustifiable over the last 10 years, Why should the next generation pay the bill for that? Right? Understand the overhang. Right? I was raised in New York City. I was a kid from Queens who went to Bronx High School of Science. Right? To hear that New York has just elected Mondani, and then to hear his acceptance speech. Folks, I fear for New York City. Right? This is a time where bad ideas, 50-year mortgages, right? Communists actually getting elected mayor of New York City with 75% of the 30 and under vote. Folks, bad ideas are just multiplying. That's the problem with bad ideas. They multiply. Right? Let's allow the housing market to clear. The answer to high prices is high prices. You know what happens? Eventually, people refuse to pay them. The market adjusts. Don't think of the housing market as priced in fiat currency. Rather, look at your family's annual income and view the houses being offered for sale as the multiple of that income. Right? Then go back in history and ask yourself, at what multiple did that house sell at in the past? If it's an old enough house, consider and keep in mind you have cities, Boston, New York, with real estate that's been there for generations. Right? If the building is old enough, go back to the pre-Nixon announcement, go back to before the early 70s and ask yourself, what was the multiple on median income that buyers back then paid for the house? I'm guessing in many cases, most cases, you're going to find out that it was far lower than the current market. Folks, we shouldn't have politicians propping up the current market if it's unsustainable. That leads to increased fragility. Google Nassim Taleb, Google fragility. Figure out why that's a bad thing for the market. That should be part of your macro view. Let's talk about another huge event. Right? Huge event. Elon Musk getting $1 trillion in a compensation package. Folks, this is a big event. What it means is that Elon Musk now has a dictatorship over Tesla. Right? His vision will be the vision that Tesla pursues. Right? Now, we need to understand the meaning of these executive deals. Folks, if you don't own stock in Tesla, then what Tesla decides to pay its management, its board, Elon Musk, has nothing to do with you, apart from the impact. I don't want to hear some politician outraged at what a private group, even if it's, even if it's a publicly traded company, has decided after voting to pay its CEO and upper management. Right? I mean, that's the bottom line. Let that market decide for itself. I don't need to hear from Elizabeth Warren about what Tesla should be paying Elon Musk. If I don't like it, then I can, in a few clicks, sell my Tesla stock. Right? That's the way markets work. I don't need legislation in Congress. I certainly don't want price fixing. Well, just to understand what a major moment this is for mankind. Elon Musk has a plan to disintermediate human labor costs. Right, folks? We've reached a point where technology might be able to do the job of lawyers, accountants, factory workers, doing manufacturing jobs. Right? All of these people who, have been saying, hey, let's bring manufacturing back to the United States. They're behind the times, folks. Right? Because we can bring manufacturing back to the United States, but it's not going to lead to more manufacturing jobs. At least not for humans. Right? So, folks, I need for people to understand how deflationary this is going to be. How the use of robots is going to quickly be embraced and adopted by most major businesses, in which robots can actually do the work. Right? A Tesla Optimus robot, I've heard, costs $20,000. Right? You pay $20,000, you own the robot. Right, folks? Most manufacturing workers get paid much more than that. Much more. Let me give you a real life example. I live in a middle class area that has some high food prices. This is Northern California. I have my pick of local supermarkets. I've heard a Whole Foods is coming to the area. We already have a Sprouts. Right? We have, a Target that has a pretty good grocery store in that Target. Right? I've been out. I've bought groceries at several different places. Right, folks? I'm also online. I, have a Walmart membership, which is great. You don't even have to pay for delivery costs, right? Outside of the annual fee. I have an Amazon grocery membership. Obviously, I like buying groceries. Well, I noticed that recently, Amazon, a company that has as many robots in its warehouses as it does human workers today, right? I assume that's going to change over time. Amazon, a company that kept increasing the size of its labor force until about 2022. And now its labor force is decreasing. Right? I started noticing that on Amazon, with a few clicks from home, in other words, didn't have to travel to the grocery store, didn't have to walk through the aisles, didn't have to fill my cart, didn't have to stand in line to check out, right? Didn't have to spend the time, literally in a much shorter period of time, just clicking the interface on my computer to, the Amazon grocery interface. I was able to buy things, right, milk, um, sharp cheddar cheese, eggs. I was able to buy things for less than from my house. I would pay for them at the store. Right? Amazon grape juice right now online is going for about $2 for 64 fluid ounces. Right? $2. In the store, it's $4. In other words, in some cases, we're talking about sizable cost differences. So, they have a recommended tip on Amazon of $5. Folks, you can literally structure your purchase so you save more than $5. In other words, the cost of me buying groceries on Amazon, and then I don't own any Amazon stock at the moment, although understand it's more reasonably priced than it's been in recent years. If you are looking at forward PE, wink wink, just understand the cost of me opening my front door and finding bags of groceries there that I've ordered is cheaper than me traveling to local grocery stores. So I thought, how could Amazon do this? And the prices are less than, you know, shopping at Sprouts, for example. So I thought, how could Amazon possibly do this? Folks, that's the deflationary impact of having a lot of robots working in Amazon warehouses. Folks, if Elon Musk gets his way, and he has a long runway now, multi-year deal, right? A vote of confidence from shareholders who voted to give him $1 trillion over several years if he hits certain performance bonuses, right? If the stock makes it favorable to Tesla, right? Just understand, Musk, who's one of the few guys I consider a genius, operating in broad daylight, right? If Musk gets his way, then many other providers, right? Many other people in the market selling goods and services are going to be able to drop their costs because labor costs are a big component of price, right? We live in a country with, and I'm not blaming anybody, right? We're just discussing reality. Reality matters. We live in a country with minimum wages. We also live in a country where the politics has been separated for some time from economics. So we're cracking down on win-win situations like foreign workers, immigrants, coming to the United States and working for less than minimum wage. Right? We're cracking down on that. So you have labor costs, right, that per hour per worker have been rising, right? And of course, if I'm paying you and we're living in inflationary times due to spending from an earlier era, right, where the government, of course, has a huge debt, right, north of $37 trillion, and has an income expense that's greater than the defense budget, right? If I have you as a worker and I'm paying you, I have to be cognizant of your ability to pay your bills. So if there's inflation, I need to up your wage periodically. So you still have the earning power to pay your bills because the relationship only works if it's a win-win. But If I can hire a robot to do your job, where I pay $20,000, get the robot, right? Upload information to the robot just like information is uploaded to a Tesla EV. And the robot's able to do the job, and my only cost is the ongoing cost of maintenance and the energy costs, right? The robot's running on energy from a battery, from whatever, right? If that cost saves me tens of thousands of dollars per worker, and if I have a number of workers, right, folks, we're dealing in a world where I can say, okay, I'm saving labor costs. Let me share those savings with the consumer, right? So just understand, we're having inflation now. If they roll out a lot of robots to a lot of providers, I think you're looking at deflation. Yesterday, of course, we were in a world of fiat currency. Has anyone figured out that now banks have gold reserves that are matching their treasury reserves? Folks, we're in a whole new world where the money is going to be limited supply, right? Fiat currency is fading into the sunset. I know they're trying to keep it alive with stable coins. Just understand, longer term, you're going to have people starting to figure things out. Technology is going to allow different markets to emerge, right? Let's just look at the robot world. Just understand, some businesses today that are not economically viable due to labor costs will now be viable. Older people remember a time when you drove your car to a gas station, you pulled up, and there was somebody working there who operated the pump, right? They would fill up your car for you, right? They knew how to open the gas tank and fill up the car. Now that was the status quo in America. Then, to save a few bucks, because energy costs got away from us, right? That's what happens when you delink from gold. Energy costs got away from us, right? Your demand for, gasoline was inelastic, and to allow you to pay, Washington started printing money, right? There was no gold restraint on the money supply. So gas stations then transitioned to, self-serve. You would save a few bucks per gallon, right? You still had the choice of what they called full service, where you were paying a little bit extra because the person, opening your gas tank and sticking the hose in carried a cost. But of course, you had the self-serve. And eventually the market chose self-serve. People decided, hey, I'm going to save money, right? We thought self-serve wasn't going to have folks in their 70s hop out their car and go to self-serve. There was a time where that was unthinkable. You thought, well, clearly there would always be a market for full service, right? A senior citizen in the car, who uses a cane isn't going to hop out the car to fill up their ride. But guess what? In time they did. Well, with robots that aren't making minimum wage, right, that aren't receiving wages, you're going to get back to businesses that involve full service, where you pull into the gas station and the robot fills up your car for you. So the world's going to change. So we all need to be aware of that. Folks, that's coming. Everything Tesla has done to get to this point, right, where, it has electric vehicles and it's educating electric vehicles, right? It's allowing the electric vehicle to download information from the internet and stuff like that. That may have just been a precursor to Tesla's real mission, which is to use that setup, to use the knowledge it has acquired in setting up a framework to update its cars, to teach its cars the road. In other words, the road to autonomous vehicles might now be the road to humanoid robots. Right? Understand what that means. Let's say you have a workforce of robots. You're passing along cost savings to consumers. Right? Just like consumers picked Walmart and stores that manufactured goods overseas. Right? Just like people right now are buying iPhones that would cost a lot more if manufactured in the United States. Right? But they're cost savings to having global supply chains. Right now, many of those supply chains are going to move to the United States. You're going to save transportation costs. There'll be less fragility in the system. But understand, you're going to lose workers, because those products are going to be manufactured in the United States. Those companies might decide that for political reasons, they will manufacture their goods in the United States using robots. Right? So right now you have a stunning opportunity. And I know the PEs are elevated, right? But if you see the market, if you realize the level of disintermediation, right, then you realize that now's a golden opportunity to invest in companies that are manufacturing commercial grade humanoid robots. Right? In time, the market will evolve further. Right? Most of the robots being used by Amazon aren't humanoid, right? The idea is, can't we set up a factory currently using humans that doesn't need humanoid robots? Can't the factory be rethought and reconsidered? Folks, the market will take care of that. Not politicians. Understand, politicians typically lag technology. Right? Satoshi Nakamoto starts Bitcoin. Vitalik Buterin and others come up with smart contracts, Ethereum, decentralized finance, and then finally, belatedly, after other parts of the world start, approving spot ETFs, then you have the Biden administration approve a Bitcoin ETF, approve a Ethereum ETF. Then, of course, you get the next step, the Trump administration coming in and taking it to the next level, right? Trump actually investing himself in Bitcoin. That's the way things usually run, right? The Wright brothers invented the airplane, right? Not the government. Al Gore did not invent the internet. Let's get the sequence right. All government has to do, quite frankly, is get out of the way. Right? With regard to the housing market, you want affordable housing? If that's your priority, the road there isn't by electing communists. The road there is by letting the current market clear, right? Breaking the bad news to current homeowners in areas that a lot of people are moving out of, that they live in a capitalist country, that in a free market, it's market participants who bear the risk of an economic downturn. Right? Some politician looking for votes is going to step in and say, you know what? The taxpayer will assume part of your loss. We, the taxpayer, need to hop in at that point and say, no, we're not. We need to start holding politicians who make crazy promises like that responsible. Right? We need to say, hey, if you're going to try to pass losses onto us that this market player assumed, that's not going to work. Right? If someone bought a house for the upside, folks, they're the ones who assume the downside. Right? We went through a financial crisis. It's shocking still to me. Within the last 2.5 decades, where a group got bailed out. That group were the banks. That's the kind of crazy world we're living in. We can't allow that as consumers to happen again. So, to President Trump, and I'm not a never Trumper, right? Let me be clear, right? I agree with Trump on crypto. Certainly not everything, right? But I agree. I'm an immigrant to the United States, for crying out loud, right? But let's just say this idea of 50-year mortgages, it's a loser. I hope in my overpriced middle-class neighborhood here, neighbors understand it's a loser, right? We don't need more housing debt spread out over longer periods of time. We need current prices to adjust so that there's more liquidity in the system, so overpriced homes fall in value enough to where the market solves the issue of affordable housing. It's a terrible day in America when some 34-year-old is able to garner 75% of the 30 and under vote by promising affordable houses, right, in a financial capital of the United States. What, the market couldn't handle this? Right, folks, loon politicians should be really your final desperate choice. Give the market the first opportunity to adjust so that supply equals demand. Those are my thoughts this Sunday morning. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Let me invite Mandami supporters, right, to comment in the comment section of this YouTube video. Right, I'll say this too, Bronx Science Story. My views in my 20s when I knew everything. At least I thought I did. Right? I was more left than I am now. And I was at some speech given by the former Stokely Carmichael, Bronx Science grad, who had changed his name to Kwame Ture. Right? Stokely Carmichael is one of the people who came up with the symbol of the Black Panther that Huey Newton and others took to a new level in the Bay Area. Right? And let me just point out that there was a crowd around him. I was a young kid who, wanted to speak with him. There were several people in front of me. So I played the Bronx Science card. Right? Bronx Science, great school. Great school. I said, Bronx Science, Stokely Carmichael. And he, of course, stopped. In fact, I said, Kwame Ture. I said, I'm from your school, Bronx Science. And he stopped. It was like the Red Sea party, right? He stopped talking to people much older than me. He walked over to me. I was a student. He shook my hand. The Bronx Science name had that kind of cachet with Kwame Ture. Right now, I'm very proud of Bronx Science. Bobby Darin went to Bronx Science, right? I'm astonished. I don't know what's. I was a loon Bronx Sciencer myself, who was very left of center, right? I'm sure Mamdani, Bronx Science grad, has the best of intentions, right? I'm sure the people voting for him think they can actually compete with Amazon Grocery, who, of course, my local Sprouts can't compete with, my local Target can't compete with, right? I'm sure they feel that spending tax dollar money on government grocery stores at a time when there's homelessness in New York City is one way to use public money, right? I need for people to remember the era before we were taken off the gold standard, right? I need for people to understand that unlike that era, you can now buy gold, right? It's a bit shocking, the symmetry of it, that you have a New York real estate developer, former New York real estate developer, in the White House, and you have the city of New York demanding more affordable housing and electing a guy who is a communist, right? He talked about taking over the means of production in speeches. That's when people reveal themselves, not when they run for office, package themselves as democratic socialists to win democratic primaries in a democratic city, right? Folks, I need for everyone to think this through. Wouldn't you be better off with the current real estate market in New York clearing? Isn't part of the problem the political manipulation of real estate markets in New York? Right? Aren't you better off with ending these subsidies, having markets clear? Wouldn't that open up real estate supply? Wouldn't that increase freedom in the United States? Right? Understand they're going a different route where they're going to increase the tax base. Are you sure that government is a benevolent player and not some mafia type group getting patronage money? Those are my thoughts. Obviously, I'm a libertarian, have been now for decades. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comments section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.